Hello all, and welcome to a late night post-work beer review, which I'm going to dub the I probably shouldn't do this beer review. Why? Well, I've been having pretty bad insomnia lately for some reason, even though I'm insanely tired. And I figure I can drink this, read my daily comics online, and probably just, face first into the bed. Um, we'll see how that works. So what is it that we are reviewing tonight? Well, it's going to be sort of a review, but it's also going to be a little bit more of a discussion because this particular beer is from Ballast Point, and it is the famous Sculpin IPA. And there you go. Beautiful fish over there. I always loved Ballast Point's, bottle art. Well, for most of the time I've been doing this, they've always sold in bottles. So back when I started reviewing craft beers, um, you know, this was one that was, renowned. And it had the reputation of being one of the best West Coast IPAs available. And that reputation is gone now. As you know, I go and pre-taste a lot of these cans. I had a couple cans a few days ago, and I can say that um, it's been so long that since the last time I've had Sculpin that I can't really quite adequately recall, the experience of drinking it. But it didn't seem that bad to me, this particular one. So without much further ado, let's just go and pour this one out. So this is 7.0 ABV, West Coast IPA. Oh, I forgot, this thing builds head like a mofo. A nice orange amber color, well carbonated, thick off-white head, redolent of grapefruit zest, apricot, slight hints of dank, and also a bit of pine as well. But mostly citrus zest and touches of stone fruit. Onto the palate now, shall we? Well, if we can get it onto the palate with 3 fingers worth of head here. Mm. Bracingly bitter, very resinous up front. A very subtle and slight sweetness emerges in the mid to finish, but a lasting bitterness on the palate in the long finish. Top note is fairly muted, but then this can has a production date of 3/26/24, which makes this, okay, so April, May, June, so 3 months old. So not at its production peak, but still, but still losing a little bit of something. I do remember now that the top note for grapefruit Sculpin, which was a rendition of Sculpin that I enjoyed the most of the versions I tried. I haven't tried all the versions of Sculpin, but grapefruit Sculpin was my favorite. It just had a very delightful top note to it, though I didn't express it as top note at the time. This was a very long time ago. Decently chewy and nice carbonation on the palate. Now, I could go a little bit more into depth, but instead I want to kind of talk about the downfall, if you will, of Ballast Point Brewing Company. So Ballast Point was basically I shouldn't say one of the bigs production-wise, but one of the bigs reputation-wise in the craft beer world in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And at times their beer was often hard to get a hold of. I remember when I started my craft beer journey that, especially when like a new release would come out from Ballast Point, because it was pretty well distributed in Hawaii at the time, that it would sell out quickly, despite it being somewhat pricier than the rest of the craft beers on the shelf at the time. This changed, and I'm going to just go and quickly go to this so I can get, okay, yeah. So this changed in 2015 when they were purchased by Constellation Brands, one of those large multinational drink conglomerates. And they were purchased for $1 billion. It was one of the largest purchases, one of the largest, highest value acquisitions of a craft beer brand ever. And I think it's been surpassed. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, during that time period, it was still kind of a boom time in American craft beer. So they were snapped up fairly quickly. So Constellation Brands saw the popularity of Ballast Point's beers and decided, well, let's just go and expand production and expand distribution. And they just massively, massively, and very quickly expanded both their distribution to the point where you could get Ballast Point beers almost anywhere in the nation, and both production to the point that it was always well stocked on the shelves. The problem became that the price point was still high. So basically, it was around like $15 for a sixer. And during that time period, another craft beer sixer would cost about, between $10 to $12 in Hawaii, that is. So they had a pretty high markup on the retail shelves. So I just remember, like in 2016 through about 2018, there just being rows and rows and stacks of Ballast Point beers just becoming shelf turds in the freezers and in the display cases, where they would just be stacked up. And they were no longer selling because there was just oversupply, And at that price point, it just wasn't going to go. So a lot of that beer had to be returned to the distributors, unsold. So eventually, by 2019, Ballast Point was sold again to this brewer called Kings and Convicts that I don't know anything about. And in order to start making money, they did contract brewing for other big brewers like New Belgium. But that wasn't enough to save the brand. And like I said earlier on, there became a sort of reputation that their quality was dropping. And I'm not sure if that's true or not. I mean, the beer that I'm drinking right now seems really damn solid. It's not the best West Coast IPA that I've ever had, but it's still a pretty damn good West Coast IPA. Well balanced between the malts and the hops. But regardless of what I think of this particular beer, overall their reputation dropped within the craft beer community for quality. You know, they weren't as having as high of a standard as when they were independently owned and run. And just a couple months ago, it was announced that Ballast Point would be shutting down their final brewing plant in San Diego, which is the city that they started in. So they're not going out of business. They're contracting out all their brewing. They're still going to have a tap room and restaurant in San Diego, but they will no longer be making their own beer. And for me, that's something really sad. And I'm kind of hammering in this whole thing, but because I really want to focus on what I believe is the contraction of the craft beer market here in America and in the rest of the Anglosphere. And it's sad because, you know, the great beers that they made. I just need a new camera. These great beers that they made are just, you know, they'll still be there, but it's not going to be the same for me. Could I have done more to support this brewery? I guess so. I mean, but it really became all about the fact that they just had too much supply. So you had a whole bunch of old IPAs sitting out with this high price point, which meant that it was like, why would you go and buy it? It was just too expensive. You know, you could have something else for less money. And now, well, I hope the brand does survive. You know, I don't care what people say. What I'm drinking right now is a solid beer. Okay? Might not be as great as a Sculpin of past, and I really wish I could have a grapefruit Sculpin. That was my favorite. But yeah, it's it's rather sad. Um you know, so I picked this up because this is a can that comes from, I'm guessing, their final run thereabouts. You know, this is 3 months old, so within a month of this beer being made, they were shutting down the line. And I wanted to kind of just go and review this beer and sort of just talk about the brand for a little bit. And I hope they survive the hard times. Uh, you know, I think there's still a lot of oomph behind this brewery, behind its beers. It's not something that should be lost to time, but eventually everything gets lost to time. But that's a philosophy discussion. You can tell I don't really script these. I kind of go in Like I literally had no idea I was going to be doing this until about, I knew I was going to be drinking this, but I had no idea it was going to be like more of a discussion about Ballast Point and me just frantically reviewing, like articles and wikis for like maybe about 30 minutes before doing this. But it is interesting to kind of go and reflect on it and to think about, the, I just said this is not a philosophy thing, but now returning to the idea of the wheel of fortune. Sometimes you're up and then you go down, just as Boethius and Ignatius Riley would say. And kudos if you know who I'm referring to. Either of them, really. Here, Boethius and Ignatius Riley. Give you a hint, it's one of my favorite books. So I'm hoping that they get through this, and I'm hoping that you have a chance to go and pick up and try some of this beer, because I figure even though they're switching to contract brewing, I think distribution is probably going to contract even more than it already has, as well as stocking. Their stock is probably their stock. I mean, what's the word? Their I'm blanking on the word right now, but what they have in the stores is probably going to go and come even less available. And so if you have a chance, go out and grab one of the remaining sixers of Ballast Point's beers while they still are coming out of their own brewery. And that, folks, is your beer review for this very late evening. It's almost 11 o'clock. Geez. Cheers.